Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement, and I am joined by my co-host P. How goes it, P?
It goes fantastically. I'm excited to dive in. We've got some fiery bullshit to talk about today.
We do indeed. We will be diving into all of the latest gossip off the Twitter sphere in a moment, and then we are going to be joined by none other than Dr. Bear, Dr. Jeff Ross himself, who may actually be putting to rest Dr. Bear once and for all. I don't know. It scared me over the weekend personally, so I demanded that he make his appearance. So he'll be joining us in about 30 minutes. But ladies and gentlemen, let's kick things off with some Bitcoin Magazine news on this Monday, November 7th. And we're going to start with the biggest story from the Twitter sphere. It looks like the two largest casino operators in the world are duking it out. CZ and SBF were making waves all over Twitter, both the real versions of themselves, and as I quickly found out, the fake versions of themselves. Let's dive in. We got some receipts. We got some tweets. Chris, do you want to pull up some of the first tweets? But essentially, this is a continuation from our story from last week, where essentially CZ is letting people know, hey, we have a significant holding of FTT, those same tokens we were talking about, the FTX tokens. They in turn have said, we need to start unwinding our position. We're going to start selling and liquidating our FTT assets. Look, the outcome of this is not even concluded. We are, if I dare say, we're only in the first quarter of the first round of this boxing match, as our thumbnail today would suggest to you. But as you can see here, CZ is announcing it. We have Dylan LeClaire, our very own Dylan LeClaire, chiming in the thread as well, essentially helping to explain what the outcome of this could mean. Look, I fell for it, but I want to reference this still. I thought it was hilarious. The fake SBF account that quote tweeted when CZ essentially quote tweeted an unusual whales tweet that alluded to, hey, there's, I think the exact figure was 23 million FTT tokens have been moved to this wallet with an eye on potentially getting liquidated. CZ, this is just the beginning. Fake SBF comes in. You want to fight? Like, you know how much BNB we got? We'll take you. Well, fun fact, BNB and Binance are not actually affiliated or associated with one another. I should have known that since I applied and interviewed at Binance a little more than a year ago now. But needless to say, this has turned into just like true chef's kiss drama. Look, you have Dylan chiming in explaining how this could actually harm FTX's overall business. You have Odell coming in from left field, letting everyone know, surprisingly, all I'm really going to do is stay humble and continue to stack sats. Look, the thing that I think Odell and Dylan did an excellent job of pointing out, the thing that we spend a lot of time reminding you guys on this show, leverage is really dangerous. And what the position FTX put themselves in by being so highly levered on FTT in particular, when we talk about, oh, all those levered positions got wiped out because, you guys were being idiots and bought Bitcoin on leverage. Now just imagine it wasn't Bitcoin and it's even like shittier money. I'm not talking fiat, which is shittier money than Bitcoin, but I'm talking like just absolute shit, made up magic, fake internet money made by none other than SBF himself. And then you go and leverage it. My guys, like, we learned this mistake, or at least I thought we did, but I guess someone like SBF needs to. It is of significance because Binance is the world's largest exchange based on number of transactions completed in a day. FTX is the number 2 exchange. I want to pull up now. Hang on. The Dice Forever Zero comment, because it just, like, this could end up being a sacrifice. I don't think both of these exchanges make it out of this unscathed. I think both of them will be damaged. And yes, I see the comment. I'm not trying to take this lightly at all. There are people who have a lot of money tied up in FTT, unfortunately. Look, I even saw
but you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Here's where I empathize with the random retail investors that are going to get screwed over from this. But truly, as I've learned more and more about FTT over the weekend, I'm like, oh, this was the playbook of all shitcoins. You have celebrities like Tom Brady, Gisele Bündchen, Shaquille O'Neal, who have advocated and shilled and also are significant bag holders of FTT. Why? Because they're affiliated with FTX, because they all went down to Crypto Bahamas and Sam Bankman-Fried handed them a bag of magic internet money and was like, hey, no, not Bitcoin. No. Like Bitcoin, like I can't do anything with Bitcoin.
The problem with Bitcoin is, we can't manipulate it. We need to be able to pump that shit, take away from the people, put it into your pocket. Do you want to be part of this scam? Well, then here you go. Yeah,
exactly. Like it is absolutely awful. The people who are going to lose money. And I just hope you are able to get your money out of there as quick as possible. If you are an FTT bag holder, like don't like wait for SBF to come in and save the day for you. Like that is a very naive way to look at things. I would argue that's almost identical to when people were sounding the alarms around Celsius and Mashinsky started being a little shady and people were like, hey, you should probably get your money out of Celsius right now. And lo and behold, watch how it played out. Do I think this
saying like deploying more capital, steady lads?
Right? Exactly. Like it's so comical to me because in those two examples in particular, I don't feel like you saw the playbook that we spent a lot of time explaining the shitcoin playbook of like airdrop, gifting tokens, like just the pre-mine, all of that stuff literally happened with FTT and the FTX token. And any individual who is trying to justify FTT, my response, sorry, Greg, I'll talk at a much slower pace just for your sake. But no, anyone trying to justify what is happening and trying to say SBF will save the day, FTT will be fine, I'm just going to call a spade and say you're a bag holder. Like your incentive is to see FTT succeed because you have some amount of your net worth tied to this.
Of course.
I open the floor to you too, Pete. I will start with you. Just in the vein of all of the shitcoin scams that we see and we openly discuss, do you feel like what we're seeing transpire in FTT is a lot of what we describe as the issues with shitcoins in general? I don't want to go to the shitcoin casino part of it yet. Just FTT as a shitcoin.
It's a great question. And the answer is unequivocally yes. That's exactly what's happening. I think that, if I may, and stop me if this is the direction that you don't want to go down, and I'll tell you to go fuck yourself. But the thing that is so infuriating to me specifically in these situations is that it's being presented, these vehicles, these things are being presented as somehow related to or part of the same ecosystem as Bitcoin. That is really what galls me in these situations. It's horrible that people are being taken advantage of, but at the same time, I don't think more regulation is the answer here. I think more regulation, as we talked about a lot on this show, just gets used by the people in power to further inflate their own bags. This kind of stuff happens though in the business world all the time, right? And when I say this kind of thing, I mean like shady bullshit where people are using public opinion and they're using influencers to pump their bags. I mean, that's kind of the definition of influencer marketing when you're hiring, a major celebrity to basically like market your product. But it is more magnified in this current environment because as Bitcoin becomes a more compelling option for more and more people in the world, the affinity scams, the desire to affinity scam becomes more and more appealing for companies to do this. So, FTX is, my God, I'm just thinking of those ads that were playing like at the peak of this last bull run where it was like, what was it? It was the fucking Matt Damon, like, be bold.
Well, that was crypto.com.
No, I know. Totally different company, but still that kind of, that model of just like,
the
get
biggest
people
celebrity
wildly excited. Yeah, exactly. And then
it's almost like the pyramid schemes from the 90s or early 2000s or like the multi-level marketing firms that are like, they get all these big names to come and like talk at that. And they're like, it's so great. It's like the Herbalife basically.
Yo, Herbalife was real. I'm kidding. Fuck
You mean the most legitimized pyramid scheme in the history of all of them?
But yeah, I mean, it's Totally bullshit. We talked about in a recent show, I was kind of ranting about how, SBF is known for doing super shady shit, implying that companies are distressed and then so that he can gobble them up. So I think it's fucking hilarious that CZ is now kind of doing the same thing on him. I think it's very interesting that CZ like publicly said this, right? Like he's like, look, we don't want to move the markets, but we're selling a bunch of shit. Don't worry. Don't even trip, dog. But also, you should probably be scared. Now there's an argument to be made that he did that because he had to, right? Either people can see the liquidations happening in real time, so maybe that's the reason he's talking about it. But
let's be honest, how much did he dump before he already said this and then put on a short while he's like sending out a tweet? Like, 100%. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, he's making money both ways. Let's be very clear. So yeah, I think it's fascinating. I think you're absolutely right, Q. It's really sad for people that are bag holders here and who are suddenly surprised, even though, us and Bitcoin maxis have been screaming about this shit from the top of our lungs. Almost everyone in the space came to the space through the shitcoin ecosystem, right? You get burned, you touch the stove, it hurts like a bitch. And then you're like, fuck everything else. And you realize that Bitcoin is the answer. And that's very different from everything else. So we all have to go through that process. I'm very excited to see how this plays out. Chris, what do you think though?
A couple things. So the real SBF, not the one that scammed Q to send him 1 Bitcoin in return for two sending back.
So sorry, bro. Sorry.
The real SBF actually tweeted out in lieu of all of this. Basically, he was saying a competitor is trying to go after us with false rumors. FTX is fine. Assets are fine. This is something you would expect someone that is running a scheme to say that it's all good. Don't trip, dog. He says that they do not, they have enough to cover their clients' holdings. They're heavily regulated. We have gap accounting. They're legit. And then he ends with this final tweet saying, I'd love it if we could work together for this ecosystem. I mean, that's just one crypto bro to another crypto bro saying, hey, we can keep this Ponzi going longer. Don't go after us, dog. So I just find that very, very funny. One other thing, Dylan LeClaire, analyst at Bitcoin Magazine, pointed out, he showed net outflows of FTX. So in the last week, they've almost had $1 billion leave the exchange, so 925 million. Last 48 hours, 687 million. And in 24 hours alone, about half of this week's net outflow was 450 million in the last 24 hours. So really, really crazy stuff.
Also, there was something else, P, that you made mention to that I think is significant here. So SBF in particular is the one really pounding and calling for a lot more regulations. Why is that? Well, we've talked about the fact he spent $40 million with our dear friend Anthony Scaramucci during this election cycle to help people get elected in positions of power. And we know how that goes. This isn't, I believe in her mission. Like, yeah, she's going to do great. It's like, hey, I gave you $40 million fucking dollars. Like, you're going to pick up my phone call. When I say like you need to regulate CZ and Binance, you're going to regulate CZ and Binance. We are bearing witness to and watching in real time. Ooh, Sarah, thank you. Appreciate you.
Slide into those DMs.
Do not. But we are literally watching a Jamie Dimon type like come to life, in my opinion. We heard Jack Mallers talk about this, how Jamie Dimon lives in DC, and that's sort of his home court is actually DC with these regulators because he's so in bed with them. And we're watching SBF try to become that to take out his competitors in the same playbook that big tech has been using for the last couple of years. Let's build up all these regulations. You're right. I built something bad, terrible, and wrong. Let's make sure no one else can ever build this again, but let me keep what I built. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, we are full blown watching an attack through regulators by a guy who just is the biggest donator. So, well, yes, P is 114 years old. This is correct. Although that's the youngest age we've cited him at.
Look, my age changes. In dog years, turtle years, chicken years, whatever you want to call it.
Full disclosure, we are dealing with Nashville P, so this is a different one of the cyborgs. So
there's many of them. I sleep in a closet. Everybody knows this, hanging from the ceiling. The point is, I don't agree that this is like just now happening. SBF is clearly a master of this, and he's been doing it for a while. But yeah, like I said, I'm super interested to see how this plays out as we go further into this bear market. Although apparently we're talking with a reformed bear in the next segment. Is that correct?
I don't want to say that officially. I want him to be the official arbiter of no longer letting me call him Dr. Bear, even though he hates me calling him Dr. Bear.
Who are we talking about, just for the audience who just joined?
Dr. Jeff Ross will be the one joining us as our guest today. We have not had him on ever since he became an official member of Bitcoin Magazine. So I am excited to have him on. But shall we continue on, or is there anything more on SBF, Binance, FTX? No, we gave enough airtime to SBF and CZ.
Absolutely.
All right, let's give some airtime to the EU then, P.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, which is I won't be satisfied until they start tweeting at each other like actual, like, yo, meet me out behind the dumpster at 1 p.m. and I'll beat the shit out of you with like baseball bats with nails sticking out of it. I think that would be incredible. And that's clearly where we're headed. You heard it here first. But I'm right. I will be right. But our next story is from the EU. One of the most oppressive regimes when it comes to free speech in the fucking world. The US has something called the travel rule. Okay. And this is a set of regulations, I think that's the right term, that basically makes it so that banks have to report on people transmitting money or taking money of a certain amount from one place to another, essentially. It's a terrible explanation, but you get the idea. This is why when I believe it's currently set, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, at 10K, although there was a recent thing around them trying to lower it to like $600 or some shit like that. So basically, this is a system that was created with the, under the auspice of like protecting you from terrorism and stopping bad people from doing bad things with money. Of course, what actually ends up happening is it is used to control people, and specifically you and I. Terrible stuff. The EU has their own set of rules like this. And they recently submitted a proposal, started draft legislation around implementing travel rule-like strictures around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency holdings. It used to say that anything that was an unhosted wallet, these rules applied to, and there was a lot of backlash. They then changed it. They clarified it to talk about self-hosted wallets because people were like, I'm hosting my wallet. Like, this doesn't apply to me. So the point is they've now changed it to be even more specific, and they are trying to make it so that it is verboten to have your own Bitcoin, to have custody of your own private keys, which is fucking terrible. We should actively be protesting this. It's super important. They want you to have your Bitcoin on a crypto asset service provider because then they can restrict people. They can do what Christine Lagarde said she wanted to do about a year and a half ago, where she said, look, if there are exits, if people can escape from the shackles we're trying to put them in, they will use those exits. So we have to block all the exits. And that's what they're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think it's very nefarious, their reason for changing from unhosted wallet to self-hosted wallet. I think and two of the definitions they used to clarify were a crypto asset service provider, like you said, P, as well as an entity not established in the EU and providing similar services. So they're really just trying to say, hey, like if you're not using something that we rubber stamp and say, okay, you're allowed to do this, but when they rubber stamp them, this organization is going to be giving them the data on transactions, most likely for all of their users or any of the addresses that they have. They want to infringe on your privacy. And we've seen this time and time again, not even just in the EU. The US is probably the worst offender of this, that they're like, hey, like there's a lot of protections in the constitution of the government going after its citizens. But if we buy it from a corporation and the corporation does the spying, that's completely okay. That's legit. So while people try and find loopholes in laws, you think governments don't try and find loopholes in the own laws that they own make, you'd be wrong. So they are definitely trying to find and take advantage of their own loopholes. And
Chris, I have to ask.
This is something that we should be worrying about. Yeah, P, what do you want to ask?
I was gonna ask if you're like smelling toast. It sounds like you're having a stroke. You said like
no. Oh, sorry.
I've
cut his mic. Cut P's mic.
I'm helping. All right, Keith, what are your thoughts?
I mean, they're just saying the quiet part out loud. Like, we've been cautioning and warning about these types of moves that they're not going to present it like we want to control how you spend your money. They're going to present it in this, we want to help you. This is in your best interest to not have control over this. And we, the people who have already ruined your money, the economy, most of society, we are the one who should also tell you how and when and why you should spend your money. Like, they're genuinely they are genuinely saying these quiet parts out loud. And it's gotten to the point where they're not even subtle about it. But if you're not paying attention, if you just sort of accept what's being told and don't go to the source, if you get your news second, third, fourth hand, candidly, if you are only hearing these stories just from us and you don't hear this and then go and like understand more about what the EU is trying to do, you're making a mistake. You're just hearing our interpretation of this, and you yourself need to understand how it is really being framed by them and take the time, because it will not stop here. They, even if they're successful or they're not successful at rolling this out, there will be other attempts at taking control over us, and it's only a matter of time until they do that. So I caution you, even with the talking heads that are the three of us, do not just buy the narratives that we believe we are seeing. Understand what is actually coming out of these people's mouths, because it's scary. It's gotten to the point where they are just saying those quiet parts that they say behind closed doors out loud in public, and most people aren't paying attention to it because mainstream media, not Fox, not CNN, nowhere else, they're not going to tell you they're saying those things. So just something to be aware of.
I think it's also interesting because to me, this is a sign that they're trying to normalize this kind of discussion more and more. So, you know, if you went back to someone, I feel like 5 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, but certainly 10 years ago, and you were like, hey, I just want to play you some quotes from politicians right now, they'd be like, you are fucking with me. There is no way that, you know, Biden said X. There's no way that Trump said Y. There's no way that Elon Musk said this. And specifically, even more so with central bankers, I just feel like they're slowly leaking those kinds of insane ideas and frames more and more into public discourse. We started to see this happen in a really hilarious way, like at the beginning of the kind of this inflationary environment we're in, where there were articles that I feel like they like published them and they were like, oh shit, it's too far. Take it back. That were like, why inflation is good for you and your family. Like, you know, like.
Or the woman who's like, inflation's not a word that people like normally use.
That was recent. I know that was
last week.
That was wild.
They had the audacity to tell me what words I should and shouldn't be using. Motherfucker, I started writing about inflation 2 years ago.
You invented the term, as I understand it, right?
I was the one who introduced it into nomenclature in Los Angeles, as the legend foretold.
Yeah, the prophecy is foretold. But yeah, and by the way, in that specific clip, if you haven't seen it, we'll put it in the show notes, or somebody should post it in the comments because it's amazing. It's this woman basically claiming that not only is she claiming that inflation is not a real term or is not a part of the public discourse, but she's claiming that it is specifically something that the right wing is like forcing into. Narrative. Yeah, exactly. They're like, it's amazing. So much bullshit happening right now. Keep your head on straight. Q, you said it exactly right. Don't trust anyone. Don't trust, verify. Go find multiple sources. Don't trust us, right? Trust yourself. Consume information from as many sources as possible. Form your own conclusions.
I challenge anyone. I made a rule for myself as the bleeding heart liberal that I am years ago. When I realized my Twitter feed was like way too like left oriented, I started making a rule for myself.
Way too many blue-haired accounts and stuff.
Way too many blue-haired, blue checkmarked accounts. So I was like, okay, I need to go like let me like fix this. Anytime for every blue account that I had under a follower, I just went and found like a more right-oriented account and found like a balance. I mean, look, at this point, my timeline is just Bitcoin. It doesn't even matter anymore. But the point I'm trying to make is like, get comfortable listening to opinions that you're not comfortable with, because you need to understand what these narratives are that are being said. It's a simple fact. But we're not done picking on the EU, are we, Chris?
No, we are not. So speaking of, you know, walking it back and saying things like, yo, like maybe it was a little too hot. They did not want to handle that. They're like the Germany's finance minister, Linder, calls the discussion of European central bank digital currencies. Don't trip, dog. They're like digital cash. They're going to be privacy focused. They are going to be awesome. They're going to be, you know, we're not getting rid of coins. We're not getting rid of cash. We know you guys love those things. We hear you guys. You guys are mad. There's going to be privacy focused. They're going to supplement the two. We're not going to get rid of those. Anyone that says that we're getting rid of cash and coins, they are conspiracy theorists and they should be killed. I mean, they should be concentrated. I mean, just use the CBDCs. They're going to be all right, dog. No reason to trip. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, guys?
That clip was amazing. Also, please, can somebody find the Russell Brand like breakdown of that clip and post it in the comments as well? Because it is truly incredible. He does such a good job of just explaining what's actually going on. It was insane. Yeah. I mean, it's again, it goes back to the whole thing of like, my friends, you should love inflation. It will make your genitals bigger and also you more virile and stronger at the same time. It's that level of just absolute insanity. But it's what's his face? It's the new prime minister of the EU. I forget his name. Q, help me out here.
Rishi Sunak.
Yes.
Oh, the UK.
Right. The UK, excuse me.
You said EU. I was
EU.
like, what?
The EU and the UK are the same thing, right? I mean, anyway, it's incredible.
Yes. They're both shitcoin operators to a degree. I mean, look, the point I just want to make on this is, again, CBDCs, they are normalizing this conversation, and it is a dangerous thing. And we don't want you to start to cave or accept. And it's more so, holidays are coming up, guys. And like, you're going to have those uncomfortable conversations because everyone's going to be like, oh, how's Bitcoin doing? How's your whatever doing? There was a chart that I saw over the weekend that I screenshotted that I'll tweet out at some point, but it's already making its waves on Twitter of like, here are all of the returns on like all of these major tech companies that all did worse than Bitcoin so far, like this year. And everyone's portfolio is down, whether you're all in on Bitcoin or you're all in on Facebook, like you're fucked either way. I urge you to question some family members and ask them what they understand about a central bank digital currency, because this could be one of the last moments where you can get through to them before a lot of the rhetoric is really force fed down people's throats. No different than the way the rhetoric was forced down a lot of people's throats in 2020. So I challenge you right now, while there's the opportunity, to just have those difficult conversations and help people, family and friends that you care about, understand what the trade-offs of a CBDC are in comparison to just the cash you have today or Bitcoin, the money of the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear. It's like freedom or slavery. And it's like, you just ask them, like, which one do you want? Like, do you want to own slaves? And if they say yes, then that's the end of the conversation. The other thing I found is that in conversations with family, especially over, Thanksgiving, things like that, I feel like one of the strategies that can be the most effective is just raising your voice more. I find that the louder I'm talking, the more clearly I'm communicating my message. And if you're screaming, they're definitely going to get it. Throwing food also helps.
Yeah, food fights at Thanksgiving go over really well, as you will also understand why P is no longer invited to my family Thanksgiving dinners anymore.
We'll talk about it later at home.
I just want to address Rumble real quick. Jim Johnson's our number one fan from Rumble. I want to point something out to you. You're right. We don't think all crypto can or will be controlled, because crypto, the umbrella term, Bitcoin does technically fall under that, and they cannot nor will they control Bitcoin. So check and mate, my good friend. I also want to address really quickly before we go to our last story. I saw in the chats the questions, and there is a ruling on the library LBRY security token. The judge out of New Hampshire has declared that LBRY violated securities laws by selling its native LBC tokens without registering with the SEC. This ruling came down about an hour and a half ago. I'll be honest, I'm not too familiar. I saw some questions in the chat asking about the ruling results. What I do think is significant, just to point out, Papa Gensler, Bitcoin's number one fan, continues to pound the drum, explaining and saying to his colleagues that Bitcoin is not a security, and the SEC continues to go after a lot of these other securities. So something to keep an eye on as these things continue to develop. I know there are, I think, 11 or 12 more other securities still sort of waiting for a verdict. So time will tell. But Jim Johnson's over on Rumble. Bitcoin is not one of them. So
I do want to jump in for 1 second and just point out that Bitcoin should not be viewed as like a fait accompli. There are ways to use Bitcoin privately, securely, in a self-sovereign way, and there are ways to use Bitcoin in a way that are not self-sovereign, that are not censorship resistant, that are not decentralized. That's part of the reason that we tell everybody so frequently, like, you need to, as you are ready to do so, take your money off of exchanges. And I'm saying this because we all need to view ourselves as champions for Bitcoin, and you need to view yourself as personally responsible for making sure that you are custodying your Bitcoin in a, self-sovereign way, and that you understand how that works. Don't just sort of like sit back on your hands and kind of be like, well, nothing needs to happen because this battle is already won. We're fighting that battle right now. And the speed with which we're able to free ourselves from this, financial slavery is affected fundamentally by, how active we all are in the community.
I don't really feel like going over more gossip while we have Dr. Jeff waiting very patiently. So I want to just remind everyone, tickets for Bitcoin 2023 are available. We have confirmed today, if you actually use Bitcoin, you will get a discount. But wait, you can pay with Bitcoin and then use the promo code BMLive to get even more of a discount off. I am helping you get the cheapest tickets possible. This is coming out of P's paycheck, not mine, not Chris's, but P's actually. So give him a shout out, thank him on Twitter, but be sure to use promo code BMLive when you check out and come to Miami. We're going back May 18th through the 20th. And of course, anything you see in the Bitcoin Magazine store, including a subscription to the print magazine, you can use promo code BMLive and get 10% off at your checkout. We will be back with Dr. Jeff after this commercial break. Thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks, and I am excited to introduce our guest today who needs no introduction, and this introduction will do him no justice, but he is the founder and CEO of Vailshire Capital Management. He is an investor and a former retired medical doctor. He also most recently has joined us at Bitcoin Magazine as our pro fund manager. My dear friend, Dr. Jeff Ross, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, Q. Good to see you. P, Chris. Chris isn't on the stage right now, but hi to all you guys. How you doing?
Fantastic.
We are great, minus one thing, and honestly, this is the reason why I messaged you frantically on a Sunday, being like, "Hey, can you come on the show?" Because I'm having a little bit of a panic because of your most recent tweet. But did you? Are we no longer allowed to call you Dr. Bear?
Oh shit.
So it's let me caveat this by saying I have a Post-it note on my computer. I don't know if you saw that tweet. It says, "Don't post trading ideas on Twitter!" ! because the trolls come after me, and I keep kicking myself for saying anything about what I do regarding Bitcoin. So here's what I like to say about Bitcoin. I am a wild fanatic about Bitcoin for its long-term prospects. I'm still very bearish macro wise. I still think risk assets are going to get hammered. I think it's quite possible that Bitcoin. So if let's talk in terms of probability. This is a really long answer to your question. Can you call me, or should you stop calling me Dr. Bear? There's a chance Bitcoin is bottomed and 17.6 was the bottom, and there's a good chance that it could just do a slow grind higher. There's also a chance that if the Fed pauses, that we'll get a really impressive rally in risk assets, and that Bitcoin will also catch a strong bid if that happens. But if things continue to get worse and we have a capitulation type event in stocks, I think it sucks Bitcoin down with it. I think if we get another crypto contagion event that I'm sure you guys have already talked about today, with SBF and FTX and Alameda and Binance and all that garbage. If we have another crypto contagion event, I think it pulls Bitcoin down too. And so even though Bitcoin doesn't deserve it, and even though Bitcoin has nothing to do with that garbage, it's still going to get sucked down alongside of it. That's just what happens. So anyways, that's my really long answer to say I'm sort of cautiously optimistic based on its price action for a trade. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet. I think in the next 9 months, things are going to be still kind of rough, and we'll see what happens.
So, just to be clear, you're saying it could go up, or maybe it will also go down.
Yes, or sideways.
Interesting.
Can we call you Dr. Crab, like crab walking?
Yeah, you could. Dr. Hedge Waffle, Dr. Waffle. It's Dr. No Commitment.
One of my favorite things is the intensity with which you like announce that you're like Dr. Bear now or you're Dr. Bull, and I feel like a special responsibility there because leading into Bitcoin 2022, we had a Twitter space, and it was sort of peak bull run, and you came in and you were like, hey, look, I think it's just important that we don't get too excited. The macroeconomic environment, not great. And I was like, fuck you, you're a bear. You don't know what you're talking about. And you were very gracious about it. And you were like, look, I'm just here and I was like, no, 500K by conference day, which I still maintain is possible.
Yes.
And you were right.
Definitely.
I got to call it.
To be clear, on all of these like 100K, 200K, 500K by conference day, pay attention to the fact that no one actually says which conference or what year that conference is.
Exactly.
I did. I was very clear. Bitcoin 2022, 500K by conference day. And I still maintain it's possible. Time travel will be invented eventually.
Yes.
The space-time continuum is not a hard limit. We're going to go back in time. We're going to make it happen. You and me, Jeff.
I love that optimism.
P, I'm giving you strike 2. We're not going to waste Jeff's time with all of our crazy conspiracy theories and ideas. I want to unpack, though. We're not going to talk trading ideas because honestly, fuck the trolls. We don't need that energy or those vibes. But what I do want to kind of get a grasp on, because I think we do see things very similarly, Dr. Jeff, of the broader macro environment just doesn't feel right. There are certain indicators that I'm paying attention to, but I'm curious, what are you paying attention to in the broader macro environment that's helping you gauge sort of where you see things going?
Sure. I think I start with what is the yield curve doing. So I'm a big fan of the Treasury yield curve. Most of the time, it's a really boring thing to care about. Most people don't care about it. But when we get into dicey times, it's a really important metric to watch. So when we see yield curve inversion and the 2-year, 10-year curve has been inverted for quite some time, but what just happened recently is the 10-year minus the 3-month curve has also inverted. Thank you, P. I love you too. So what does that mean? So at this point, a recession, I would say, is inevitable, and not just a technical recession, right? We had a technical recession in Q1 and Q2 of 2022, and then we actually had some solid GDP growth Q3, and we might have some solid growth Q4 here.
Not to interrupt you, but for the people who've been living under a rock for the better part of this year, can you help define what the technical recession that happened was?
Sure. So 2 quarters in a row of negative GDP growth. That's just kind of what a technical recession is. It usually occurs at the same time that we have a real recession. A real recession is when you involve other parts of the economy. And so the main part that most people are talking about is unemployment. It's hard to have a real recession when unemployment is historically low. It's like literally still sitting at record lows. Now you can divide that up into 2 camps too. There's one camp that shows that unemployment is still amazingly low. There's another metric that says, well, participation rate is actually lower than it should be. That's not healthy. It's not as good as it seems. The household survey actually looks like we haven't had any job growth for several months. So it just kind of depends what metrics you look at. But what I focus on, and whether this is right or wrong, here's what I do. I focus on the metrics that the Fed focuses on, because the Fed makes policy based on the stuff they focus on. They don't care. We all know that CPI doesn't accurately reflect what real price inflation is, right? We know it's much higher than that. The Fed doesn't care what we think, right? The Fed cares about what does the CPI show, and more importantly, they say, what does the core PCE show? They've said that many times. So I look at core PCE. So core PCE came in for the latest reading was 5.1%, which was higher than the month before and higher than the month before. That still is not looking good. Inflation is still high. So those are what I look at. So bond market tells me a recession is not only inevitable, but now that the 10-year minus the 3-month curve has inverted also, it means that it's increasingly imminent. So it's probably starting anytime soon. I think probably the first half of 2023, we're going to be in a legit, no fun structural recession, and it's going to be unhappy for lots of people. Excuse me. So that's one thing I look at. What else do I look at? What I care about as a hedge fund manager and as an RIA, I want to know, how do I make money off this? How do I preserve my clients' wealth over time? How do we, how do I generate alpha? So what other things I look at? The strength of the dollar, right? The dollar has been really strong this year. It's gone up a ton, but it's backed off recently. In fact, today it's getting kind of hammered again today. Have we peaked? Possibly. Is it likely? I don't know. I think it's probably going to go higher in 2023, but at some point I expect a significant weakness in the dollar, and then we get commensurate strength in risk assets. I think the timing of that all works when the market believes that the Fed is actually going to pause their rate hikes when we finally peaked and we've reached the terminal Fed funds rate. I think we get a rally in risk assets at that point. That's historically what has happened. It happened way back in 2006 to 2007. I think I've talked about this with you guys before. The markets rallied really hard from basically summer 06 to October 2007. And then the Fed was like, oh crap, there's actual structural problems. The bond market never did signal that we're out of the woods yet. And so stuff started breaking, and then the Fed panicked and started rapidly. That's when they pivoted and started decreasing rates rapidly. And then the floor kind of dropped out under the market, and it was just kind of a disaster after that. And as everybody knows, and then the market ended up bottoming. Stock market bottomed in March of 2009. So this can be kind of a long, drawn out process that's kind of painful. I think we're actually still kind of early in the phase. One other caveat I'll have this is I don't think it's going to last nearly as long as the global financial crisis, because the Fed is moving way faster. They're literally just trying to break things as fast as they can in order to bring, destroy demand and bring inflation down. I think they're going to succeed in destroying demand, and they're going to succeed in destroying the economy, wrecking people, putting people out of business, putting people out of work, and driving prices down that way. I think it's barbaric. I think it's a socialist way to respond to this, and I don't like it. I don't like it that they're doing it this way, but this is what we have. You got to play. You got to play with the cards you're dealt. And so still bearish for now. I think we get a rally at some point, but then I still think there's more pain after that to come. I think Bitcoin, even though it's the greatest asset that's ever been created, and everyone should own some, and everybody should own more of it, that I still think it gets sucked down lower if the floor drops out under risk assets.
So I know I've obnoxiously asked this question to you 1,000,001 times, but for the 1,000,002nd time, I at least do not believe there's been any indication or any reason to believe that the correlation between the specifically tech stocks and equities and Bitcoin in particular has dissipated or disappeared. You spend a lot more time studying this stuff. Do you feel like that actually is not, or that sort of has started, let me rephrase, these two items have started to sort of distance themselves from one another, or are they still somewhat correlated?
All of that stuff fluctuates, and it depends on what time frames you look at. You can look at daily correlation charts, weekly, monthly, blah, blah, blah. Historically, there was almost no correlation until about 2020, actually, when the markets crashed. All correlations went to 1, and then they rose together with each other, and correlation stayed really tight. I think that the correlation between Bitcoin and risk assets is going to stay very strong as long as we're in this nascent phase of Bitcoin. We're still in price discovery phase. So it's still going to act like a risk asset, even though it's not, even though we all know what it is. Fundamentally, it's not a risk asset. It's the ultimate risk off asset, but it's going to act like it while we're in price discovery phase. When will we get out of price discovery phase? Maybe once the market cap is above gold and people start taking it seriously as a legit store of value, then it becomes an actual kind of less volatile store of value and becomes a unit of account that people won't make fun of because it's so volatile. We're a long ways from that, right? Our market cap's what, 400 billion or something right now. It'd have to go basically 25x from here to get to where I think it's okay. Now we can consider it a more stable store of value. Now it will probably become officially uncorrelated with the stock market. It'll act more like the US dollar acts. It will be what people flock into when they're scared and not flee from when they're panicking. We're still in the flee from stage of Bitcoin, and I think this is going to last for many years still.
If I did the bad math in my head correctly, I hate to give P any legitimacy on this show, but I do think that roughly translates to just under 500K by conference day.
by conference day. I did not say by conference day, to be clear.
No, I took the creative.
You heard it here first.
So one time you and I had a lovely conversation where we actually discussed, education being so vital in helping people to understand and help to sort of bridge that gap. You have a microphone and a mouthpiece right now. I'd love for you to just, for any fund manager, anyone in particular who maybe isn't as much of a Bitcoin bull as those of us are, what are a few things you would say to them so they can try to really grasp how this is a risk off asset?
Sure, that's a great. Well, it's a risk off asset by design, right? I mean, what it is it's the opposite of, it's the antithesis of fiat money. So you have your fiat currency that government creates. It's very centralized. Bitcoin is completely decentralized. Fiat money can be printed to infinity. Technically, credit can be expanded infinitely. Neil Kashkari has been very clear in saying things like that. The meme we all use is money printer go burr. It can go burr for as long as it wants to. And what that means is it will go burr until it drives the value of each individual dollar down to zero over time. It's just a mathematical equation. As you print something to infinity, the value of each individual unit goes to zero. It approaches zero over time. Bitcoin is the opposite. One of its amazing features is that it's perfectly scarce. So you can't print more to infinity, no matter how valuable it gets. You can't crank up more printers. You can't crank up more miners and print more of it. You'll get the exact same amount every 10 minutes that it's scheduled to be released. There's nothing that's so here's what I like to say a lot. Risk only equals volatility in academia, right? So people talk all the time about an asset and its volatility, and they say that equates to risk. It's because you can measure and define that. And so people like to use that, especially traditional finance people, especially academic MBAs. I got my MBA too, so I went through all of this kind of garbage. They measure risk using equations, and it's the easiest way to do that is so-called volatility. That is not what true risk is. True risk is actually the chance of losing your purchasing power over time, depending on where you put your money. So if you put your money in a stock, will you lose your purchasing power 1 year from now? They call the 10-year treasury the world's risk-free asset. But was it really risk-free if you've lost, say, 30% of your purchasing power this year because you held 10-year treasuries? I would humbly submit that that was a pretty risky investment and actually pretty stupid. But you can't say that to pensioners and institutional investors who have 40% of their client money in those things. So Bitcoin is not risky because it's volatile. It's actually that's a feature, basically, because we're in the price discovery phase. It's been more volatile to the upside. People who have believed in it and held Bitcoin for the long run have been very handsomely rewarded, and I think they will continue to be rewarded. Why should pensioners and institutional investors and endowments consider Bitcoin? Because it's pretty clear to anybody who's paying attention that we're coming off of the mother of all bubbles, right? So the peaks that we reached in Q4 of 2021 were literally off the charts based on most metrics that at least I look at. Price to sales ratios for stocks were as high as they have ever been, higher than 1929, higher than 1999 and 2000, higher than 2008. They were higher than they've ever been, meaning that stocks were overbought more than they should have been. Bonds also literally had reached negative rates throughout much of the world. In the US, the interest rate on the 10-year treasury approached zero. It almost was zero. Real estate was at record high valuations as well. So we had historic valuations, a historically gigantic bubble. When you get that, as anybody who thinks and studies market history understands, when you reach those levels, to anticipate future gains being anything more than basically flat is basically asinine. It's really stupid to think like that. More likely, the 10 to 12 year returns, if you go back to the start of this year, if you look ahead 10 to 12 years, you're probably going to lose money in stocks and bonds. A 60-40 stock bond portfolio is probably going to lose money. So you need to look elsewhere to make money. Excuse me, had to cough, still have a lingering cough. Bitcoin is something different, right? It's a hard asset. For those who understand it, yes, it's digital, but it's a truly hard asset. It's hard money. It's hard to reproduce. You can't just make more and more of it like you can with the dollar. It has been shown over time to be, though it's volatile, it's an appreciating store of value. This feature will become more and more understood over the years. We still have a long ways to go before people understand that. Gold did a very fantastic job of being a stable store of value for thousands of years, and all fiat currency has done a really remarkable job at being a depreciating store of value over time. And so when you put those three up by each other, sure, you can go to gold for it to be a stable store of value in your fund or in your portfolio. But why wouldn't you have an appreciating store of value where you know the monetary policy is already built in? We know the monetary policy all the way through 2140. All the way through the year 2140 and beyond. There's nothing unknowable about it. We don't have to wait for a group of 12 Fed people to sit around and make policy decisions for us. We know exactly what the disinflation rate of Bitcoin is going to be. I'm really sorry, guys. I had the flu a couple of weeks ago and I've had this lingering cough, but
No, you're good.
So anyways, this is a super long answer to say there's really nothing risky about Bitcoin. The only thing unknowable about it is the short-term price movements. But we know that in the long run, that if you have something that people value and that is perfectly scarce, the value will increase and it will approach mathematically infinity over time. And so even if you just put a small amount of your portfolio into Bitcoin, which everybody should, I believe, it's a career risk at this point not to. You're basically insuring your portfolio against the other 99% or whatever percent you put in other assets. And the fact that I believe that other things like stocks and bonds are basically going to perform flat to negative over the next 10 to 12 years.
Interesting. Even if they turn the money printer back on, which I do want to also unpack, because Jerome Powell did make mention last week in his speech. He was like, well, we know we can pump the market full of liquidity because we did it once before when the market crashed really badly.
Yeah. So if I may, so for sure they're going to turn it back on, right? QE infinity is truly QE infinity. We're at this place right now where they're acting all tough and they're trying to tighten to bring down inflation. It won't last much longer. It's gonna flip at some point. It could be a month. It could be 6 months. It could be as long as a year. That's probably unlikely. But at some point they flip and we get back into a monetary expansion cycle again. What will happen? Risk assets will take off again. What I anticipate for the 20s, just to look at this visually, the 2020s, we're going to go like this: up, down, and we're going to end right here, 2030, exactly where we started in 2020. Dang, sorry about this cough.
Your muting skills are on point, by the way. We haven't heard a single cough.
You need to teach Pete how to properly mute and unmute. Is what he's trying to allude to.
It's challenging. Yeah,
I can't be done.
I need to talk less and let you guys talk more. Hang on. You say something and I'll cough more.
Well, I do think there's something very important. Just most Bitcoiners, I think, understand this, but a lot of the gains that we saw in the COVID market bubble from 2020 to now were due in large part because the market was artificially pumped up with a bunch of liquidity. And the moment they began to unwind it, not only did you see, like, let's just talk equities for a second. Not only did you see every single major stock index go from an all-time high to levels that were literally at or below the COVID dip, that should just be the sign to you that it was literally as though Barry Bonds juiced himself up and then went out there and hit 70, however many home runs. That's not the real home run record, because as a Red Sox fan, I hate to say it, but Aaron Judge is the true home run king, not Barry Bonds. Fight me on that, anyone. I dare you to.
Jeff, I don't play football, so I don't know.
Baseball is the worst sport in the world. Like, full stop.
That was me.
But the point I'm trying to make, and Jeff, like, please feel free to either tell me like you're an idiot or like, hey, you might actually like not be the dumbest person in the room here today. That the market that we saw, the all-time highs were so artificial. And then as the Fed has essentially decreased the liquidity, we're at levels below where we were before the COVID pump really started.
Yeah, great points. And I like to really bring up to people, most people don't understand this, which is kind of funny to me, but markets are cyclical. The business cycle is cyclical. It's a sine wave. It goes up, you have expansion, we peak, and then we descend the hill, we approach the bottom, we trough, we hit the bottom, and then you go back up again, and you just repeat over and over and over again. Because we have this credit-based system, those cycles get massively excuse me, this cycle for investments gets massively distorted. Credit expansion gets pushed into different risk assets depending on where we are in which cycle. And so you see these massive bubbles in housing, you see massive bubbles in stocks, you see massive bubbles in bonds, which are not normal. That's awesome. Sorry, guys. That's awesome when you're in the bull market. It's terrible when you're in the bear market, because at some point this has to deflate. The everything busts. The tulip mania finally subsides and everything goes back towards its normal value, which is basically zero. So that's what happens, and we're forced to live through these cycles, unfortunately, because of what the Federal Reserve and central banks around the world all do. They make this artificial world that we all have to put up with. Very frustrating. That's another huge selling point for Bitcoin. We won't have these massive boom and bust cycles. You don't have things like crypto going up 1,000x, even though it's literally worth zero. There's no cost to create these crypto tokens, but if they have a good marketing team and the right venture capital team behind it, they can go up 1,000x, and they can leave retail investors as bag holders while they pull the rug out from under them, and the VC people walk away, making millions and billions of dollars. It's very frustrating for me to watch when you know what's going on behind the scenes and you see who the beneficiaries are, right? Smart people know how to take advantage of this system. It's the Cantillon effect. So if you're close enough to the money printer, if you understand where the money is flowing from, you can get access to it and you can make a ton of money. And that's why we have such massive income inequality. That's why it's going to lead to massive government overthrows, geopolitical disasters. This is the decade for that, because inequality has reached a breaking point. People are starving, people are angry. I think there's nobody to blame except the money and the incentives that the fiat system creates. That's the beauty, again, about Bitcoin, is it incentivizes people to do well. It incentivizes people to build for the long run, to think about other people other than yourself. It incentivizes people to work hard and to store your value and to quit playing the lottery, and to quit gambling in penny stocks and meme stocks and whatever else things that people gamble on. I'm not against gambling, but I think the need to gamble comes for a lot of people out of desperation, right? Everybody is dying. They're desperate to make more money. They're desperate to get out of this cycle. And you can't get out of it in the credit-based fiat Keynesian world that we're in. You just literally can't escape it. You're forced to be basically a slave to debt for your entire life, except for the special few that are able to figure out how to rise on top of that and be the people to hand out debt and to make money off of this whole process. It's extremely frustrating for most of the world's population, and we're getting to the final days of it, thankfully. But it's going to be really ugly as we transition out of this system and onto a Bitcoin standard. And it's not going to happen super quickly, I don't think. I think we have years of this to deal with.
On that note, what type of timescale do you imagine this happening on? I mean, obviously there's no way to know for sure, but are you talking about in the order of within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll start seeing some of these major kind of societal shifts? I always just think back to, I think it was in ancient Rome, where it's like, as the Roman Empire was falling, if you look at the letters that were going back and forth between various people, across distances, there were very few moments where people were like, oh, this is happening. It was just sort of increases in, the number of bandits on the road over a certain period of time. But it took many, 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 many years for that to actually play out. So 5 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, 20 to 40 years.
Great question. It's hard to say. I think it's going to take the longest in the United States, actually, because the U.S. is the strongest economy and has the world's reserve currency. The dollar, as we're seeing, can be really strong when it needs to be, and it literally sucks the life out of other currencies and other economies around the world. That's what we're seeing right now. Again, I think we get out of it, though, when we bottom. So in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will see many countries fall. Their currencies will fall, and they will fold into the US dollar, possibly into the Chinese yuan, and that whole block of countries. I've said this a few times with you guys too, so sorry to keep repeating. And some of it will flow into Bitcoin. And it just depends how quickly the Bitcoin infrastructure goes, so it can capture that purchasing power over time. But it comes in waves, as we see. We're going to see another massive wave as the next wave of liquidity is unleashed on the world, probably in the second half of 2023 and beyond. I think Bitcoin will be one of the major beneficiaries of that as well, and so will we as holders. How long will it take? It depends. Part of me, when I hear the arguments for hyper Bitcoinization and the S-shaped curve and this all happening way sooner than we think, I could actually kind of see that happening. I can believe that it could happen. I think it's unlikely to happen though. To have that massive of a change, I think would be kind of rare for humans. I think it will take us more time to figure all this out, and I think there's going to be sort of this awkward relationship between Bitcoin and the U.S. dollar that will last for probably a couple of decades or so. Would be my guess. We're going to have the dollar as still this dominant medium of exchange, and Bitcoin will be this increasingly dominant store of value. And then at some point, people will realize, why do we even need a dollar at all when we just have Bitcoin? And if by that point, layer 2, layer 3, 4, 5, Jack Dorsey's layer 5 will be built out in Bitcoin and whatever all that means. And then at that point, we'll just be in a Bitcoin standard in a Bitcoin world, and we won't even think about government fiat currencies. In fact, we'll look back and think that was crazy that we used to let governments print money and decide the value of our money. That's insane. So I look forward to that day, but we're still a ways away from that.
For someone who's not really hyper political and doesn't like talking politics, I feel like we talked a lot of politics for the first half of this interview today.
We did.
I think there's also a really important notion where we talk about it in Bitcoin a lot, but this separation of money and state, no different than, separating church and state. You see these narratives forming from the IMF and the WEF, like really attacking a country like El Salvador. Oh, they're going on this Bitcoin standard, but that's a bad idea. You shouldn't do it. Argentina, like, we'll only give you this money if you promise not to use crypto so that, we can have all this control over you. We saw in real time, to Jeff Ross's example, Sri Lanka, another country that just took money and loans from the IMF under the guise of, we'll give you this money, but you have to do the song and dance and like be all like clean energy the way we're not, but you should be. And in turn, that economy completely like crumbled and fell. Look, I don't want to ask you the crystal ball question. I want to save that for when you and I are in Vegas together in a few years. But what I do want to get a sense from you is what do you think Bitcoin and Bitcoiners in particular need to do to help other countries get onboarded in the way El Salvador has onboarded onto a Bitcoin standard?
I see evidence of this happening already all around the world. What happened in El Salvador started with Bitcoin Beach, right? El Zante. Like, it just literally started in this tiny little community where a couple Bitcoiners were like, "Hey, let's do this. Let's create a little circular economy using just Bitcoin. We think it will help the community. It's a dirt poor community. They're really nice people. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could help them out and see what Bitcoin can do?" They did it, and then years later, look what happened. El Salvador now has a president who's shilling Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, putting it on their balance sheet, and making fun of the U.S. dollar, and getting attacked by United States politicians and international politicians because of it. That's pretty astonishing. I see these kind of communities happening all around the world, which is awesome. They're in Africa, they're in other parts of South America and Central America as well. You don't see them as much in countries like the U.S., where we have a really sound financial system, and the dollar is actually a pretty good currency as far as currencies go. Even though it's the nicest looking crack house on the crack street, as Greg Foss likes to say, and I like that analogy. So we won't see it as much here, and it's a little harder to implement little communities like that here, but you could do it. We could create little circular economies in the US, and they are kind of starting to sprout up. So I just think that's how it is. That's what's so beautiful about Bitcoin. We've reached peak centralization. We've reached peak nationalism in countries that have these huge, massive monopolies on power, and they literally can destroy the world, 10 times over if they wanted to. If they wanted to start a nuclear war and do it, they could. That's ridiculous. And so nothing is better or makes me happier from a human point of view that we've reached, I think, peak centralization, and now we're starting to decentralize. The internet made this much easier, and now Bitcoin, being magic internet money, is making it even much easier. To your point, Q, of the separation of church and state, I think we're living in it. It's hard to see it in real time, like you don't see it happening, but at the same time, if you look closely and you can take a step back, that's one of the things I'm good at. By the way, I'm kind of a top-down macro thinker. Like, I kind of see the big picture happening. I'm not as good at the little details. But when you take a step back and look, you can see all of this happening kind of right under everybody's noses. We saw internetization happening in the 90s and early 2000s, where most people didn't believe that it would, that much would happen. And then suddenly everybody got Amazon, right? All the brick and mortar retailers just got pummeled. and then the blockbusters went out of business because up came Netflix and things like that. Like that's exactly what's starting to happen in the Bitcoin world too. One by one, we'll just see dominoes fall. Everybody who makes fun of Bitcoin and doesn't believe it and doesn't want anything to do with it, they're literally just going to get run over, and they're actually going to get put out of existence by Bitcoin at some point. And then 10 years from now, we'll be like, I can't believe you didn't see that coming. Like, it was so obvious. Why didn't you see, why didn't you see the internet coming in 2000 and put all your money in Amazon and Netflix and Google, and it's like, well, it wasn't that obvious though, for most people. Most people didn't really believe it was going to have the dramatic impact or as quickly as it did. So I see the same thing happening with Bitcoin. It's a beautiful ground up organic type growth. It doesn't come from the state. That's what makes it awesome. And the state will fight against it because it is, as you say, the separation of money and state. And then even as it's happening, by the way, since we're one day away from voting, you all should vote. That's great. You're Americans. Take advantage of that. But if you really want to be effective in politics, buy Bitcoin. I'm telling you, you will defund politicians, you will defund the state, and we will, as we move into this more decentralized world, you're literally making the dollar weaker, and you're making politicians weaker, and you're increasing the whole Bitcoin standard, and you're hastening the rise of the Bitcoin standard and the new Bitcoin standard world, which that's something I'm shooting for. So that's how I try to vote. I vote with my dollars getting exchanged into Bitcoin.
That I love that. I'm gonna caveat for anyone in, honestly, like fuck it, put me down for any. I genuinely wrote myself in for every possible write-in candidate role, and I welcome anyone else who wants to write me in as a candidate. This is me officially running for office in 2022. My mom voted for me as well, so I got 2 votes at least.
Yes.
Would love at least a third.
I already mailed in my ballots, dude. Otherwise, I totally would have. I wish you would have told me that. Next, 2024. Are you going to go for president? Write-in president?
I'm too young to be president, but 2028. I know.
Okay.
I know. P, on the other hand.
What's the age cutoff?
35.
That's absolutely insane to me.
What, that you can be 35 and be president, or that you have to be 35?
Did you have to be 35 to be president?
I think you should be at least 80 and have at least mild dementia to be president. Or
see, that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Massive ego.
Love that. Like, also, could we just make sure you can't have hair as good as mine? You got to have like a weird hairstyle where only hair from like the mine. Front.
Yeah.
But like, at least with Papa Biden, in case you guys didn't know, Joe Biden is like bald as a motherfucker, and he just sets his hair up in a way where on camera it looks like he's got hair, but that's like other angle, dude is as bald as a baby's bottom, to say the least. But we have now sidetracked this fully. I want to take it back to Bitcoin, because I do like that call to action. We talk a lot about, you vote with your dollars, and if your dollars are not circulating in that system and instead are being used in a Bitcoin economy, they have less and less control over you. My next question, P, so that we can give Dr. Jeff's voice a little bit of a rest and a break. What is one thing during this bear market that has really gotten you excited, where it's under the table, nobody's talking about it, and you're like, in 5 years, you're going to be like, oh shit, Lightning Network that I clearly saw in 2017, knew it was going to be legit. I told you guys about it then. Well, that's what you told me last night, but all right, fine. Don't take credit for it now in public. But
look, I knew about the Lightning Network back in 2006. I was super excited about it, and I've been promoting it ever since. That is
you bought
joke.
Bitcoin in
did not exist
2002, right?
No, I think it's a good question.
But let me also change it a little bit. I want it a little bit more specific. Could we talk a lot about Fediments? And I think, especially based on our conversation we had with Obi last week, we really explained how Fediments is not going to be for people like you and I, and candidly for most of our audience. It's more for the real life situations that people need to be using sound money today, right now. We have that privilege and luxury of living in the country that prints the global reserve currency, and therefore don't have as desperate of a need to sound money this second. So I'm essentially going to take Fediments away from you. Oh
yeah. First of all, I hate you, because that's exactly what I was going to say, as you know. But I actually don't think that's the case. I think that I agree that there is a more dire need for those types of technologies, and for people in many other places where they do not have the world reserve currency as their sort of native currency. But I actually think that means that a lot of places are getting a head start on Americans, right? Obviously, many Americans, as a whole, may have more capital to deploy into Bitcoin. But I think that, as we talked about before, a lot of places like El Salvador, like Madeira, like so many other places in Africa, they hear about Bitcoin and you're just like, yeah, it's unconfiscatable money that is censorship resistant. And they're like, shut up, I'm already in, And in the United States, it's like we're all talking about going, to talk to our families over Thanksgiving and having to like have this like fucking, the red string going across everywhere in the room. You're like, invite the family in and you're like, you see, it all starts back in the year 1971, and I think that a lot of those places have an advantage over us. I also think that in the United States, a lot of people are going to get profoundly wrecked in a way that is more, I don't know what the right word is, but more dramatic than a lot of other places for that reason. I know we talk about it a lot. Odell brings it up in every single episode of his show, but like The Mandibles is a really interesting book if you haven't read it, because it really goes through the decline of sort of like a family that, had its own empire, and they just, at every turn, they're kind of like, how could this possibly be happening? And I think that that's going to happen to a lot of people in the United States. Anyway, to answer your question, I think that, another really interesting area of development that's being done is in figuring out how to bring the Lightning Network to people that are using mobile phones as their primary computing device. The vast majority of the world does not have access to a standalone computer. They use their phone as their connection to the internet and as their primary everything. They go to work and charge their phones at work, and then go home where they don't have running water or electricity, and they're using their phones because they can get access to cell service, but they don't have access to consistent electricity. So one of the challenges in the Lightning Network is basically figuring out how to make Lightning wallets that are where you have full custody of your Lightning, where you're actually running the node on your mobile device, to make those a more effective and more powerful user experience. There's a lot of really great apps that kind of bridge that gap and that are sort of these hybrid custody models, but I'm really excited for the work that a lot of people are doing in bringing that fully to mobile devices and solving some of those UX issues. I also think, I'll throw one other thing out there. I think another really interesting area is the work that that Block is doing. They're building hardware devices that are really kind of focused on how can you bring Bitcoin, again, to as many people as possible? How can you bring secure and safe Bitcoin to as many people as possible? And the thing that I specifically really admire about what they're doing, though I don't necessarily agree with all of their design choices, I do agree with most of them, is that they are bucking the trend. When they announced the way that they were rolling out their hardware wallets, the fact that I think they're going to be seedless, they have like an NFC signing device that pairs with, it's basically like a 2 of 3 multi-sig. They keep there's sort of one of the signers is on their server, one is on your phone, and they have this really cool looking little hardware device. And people were like losing their fucking minds because traditional Bitcoin Twitter, people are like, you got to have absolute maximum security at every single step of the process. Meanwhile, I'm specifically referring to people's resistance to having an NFC-based signing device because it's not as secure as some other methods. The point they made is they're like, look, even though that by itself may be less secure, when you add that to an existing stack, you actually significantly increase your security over the alternative, and people are still really upset about it. So I think I really respect that they're bucking the trend and they're doing what are arguably very well-articulated technical and design decisions. So that's a cool area as well. Can't wait for that to launch, because it's going to be so easy your grandma can use it. And you're not going to have to explain anything. You're going to be like, here you go, download this app, here's this device, go figure it out. And she'll come back and be like, I understand everything about Bitcoin.
I saw some questions in the chat, and Chris, thank you for posting the Fediment link. If you didn't catch our conversation with Obi, I highly recommend after we're done with this conversation and before the BM Pro Twitter Spaces later this afternoon, that you go check that out. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. On Rumble, just subscribe up above. And if you are listening to this on the podcast feed, please, please, please make sure you subscribe and leave us a review. It helps more people discover these lovely conversations that we get to have. I'm going to piggyback off of P's before I pass the mic off to you, Dr. Jeff, but I actually think in particular what you just described out of Block is going to be the most important thing to onboarding en masse. I spend way too much time, and Shinobi, I think part of the reason why Shinobi refuses to come on the show is because I annoy him with my 80-20 question of let's not be fucking naive. I don't know when I put, or I have a push to start car now. Like, I don't know what's actually happening in my engine when I'm pushing to start, but I know I push it, the car goes, I put it in reverse, and I drive my car. There is a small subset of the population that really understands the nuances of an electrical combustion engine. I'm not one of those people. I'd even dare say, like, P, do you know what really happens in a light bulb when you flip on your, you probably do.
I do actually, but that's
I
a terrible example. I have no idea what the fuck happens in a car. Also, there's no such thing as an electric combustion engine.
Internal combustion engine is what I
yeah,
said.
there you go. No, you said electric.
Whatever. The point I'm trying to make though is like there's going to be this point where I think a lot of users on Bitcoin in particular cannot nor will they ever understand like how to properly send a certain transaction or how to do this or that. And we need to make the use cases so easy that your grandma can just be onboarded and like, oh, I bought a little bit of Bitcoin and I sent it to my grandson for his birthday present. Like, that's what I want. I want grandmothers sending their grandchildren Bitcoin for Christmas, birthday, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate in the upcoming holiday season. I want it all covered by Block. So shout out to them. Dr. Jeff, I present the same question to you of in this bear market, what has you most excited for? What is the development that's really growing that you think a lot of people are going to be paying attention to?
Well, first of all, like when P, you were talking about the stuff that Block's doing, I'm one of those people. I literally have like no idea. Like half of the stuff you said, I don't even understand what you're talking about. So I'm like Q's grandma. I'm like, I just want to press the button and have my Bitcoin do what I want it to do. So I'm early stage because I came in with the finance wave into Bitcoin, but I don't understand it from the technical side hardly at all. Like I do enough to talk about it, but I could never, I couldn't work on, on the Bitcoin protocol and keep it safe and do anything useful at all. So just so you guys know, that's how I look at it. I'm looking at it to be where people like me and people who are much dumber than me, and there's not many because I'm pretty dumb, so I'm pretty low IQ, but people who have even lower IQs where we can just basically say Bitcoin is just the standard. This is just what you do now. When Jack Mallers talked at Bitcoin Miami in 2022, he was talking about it being available at convenience stores, at Walmart, at McDonald's, at Starbucks, basically. So you could go in and you could just very easily make purchases with your Bitcoin. I'm still waiting for that to happen. I think that's going to be a massive development for Bitcoin. I think once that happens, for sure, I'm going to use it, right? Even though I hate spending my Bitcoin, I will do it just so I can be out in public spending my Bitcoin so people can be like, what are you doing? I'm spending my Bitcoin. What's Bitcoin? And start talking about it. And I think, and when people see how easy it is to do that, and it's just as easy as whipping your credit card out and doing that and be like, hey, and did you know, like the retailer here, McDonald's, they don't even get charged the extra 3% fee that you do, but that Visa and MasterCard charge them. It's just the Bitcoin Lightning Network. This whole transaction probably cost about a fraction of a penny, and talking about that and talking about what makes Bitcoin different. And I think as soon as it gets to be easy, most people just don't care. They're just like, whatever, like if you give me the option, I'm just going to do whatever is most convenient and whatever is easiest for me. So I'm a huge fan of anybody who's working on that, who can still keep the ethos of Bitcoin, who can still keep it secure. It's still decentralized. It's still safe to use. But it's just really easy to use. So huge fan of what Jack's doing at Block, huge fan of what the other Jack's doing at Strike. And there's tons of other people doing awesome work. That's just going to continue to get built out. As an investor, what I look at is who's doing that well, and how can I support them from an investment standpoint. Like I want to be investing in places like that. Swan Bitcoin is another good example. I want to be investing in Swan as they build out their services and people start to move away from the huge behemoths like Schwab, like JP Morgan, Bank of America, and they move into institutions like Swan, like Unchained Capital, like things like that. Like I love that kind of stuff. That's the kind of infrastructure that I can understand, and I like to see it get built out. So I want to see it get built out, get really easy to use. And then that's when the mass adoption will happen, I think, much more quickly at that point. Then you can be standing next to somebody at McDonald's, and when you pay for your thing on Lightning, with your Bitcoin, and you explain it to somebody, be like, hey, here, I'll whip you, I'll give you 100,000 sats right now, or let me pay for your Happy Meal, and I'll show you how easy it is. And then that's going to be a super easy way to sort of evangelize Bitcoin and get just regular people to use it. So I think that's happening in El Salvador right now, and it's going to take hold across the world, hopefully over the next couple of years.
I just want to respond briefly to one thing you said. There's this idea that like you can only understand Bitcoin from a technical perspective, or people are like, oh, I'm not like smart enough, or I'm not technical enough. And to me, like that's one of the things that's so exciting. Like you understand economics and financial systems and markets better, you've forgotten more than I will ever know about those things. But and so, that is an essential component of Bitcoin. The monetary aspects of Bitcoin is so important, and we all bring different things to the Bitcoin space into these conversations. And that to me is one of the things that's the most compelling about it. So I just want to say that for our audience, like you don't have to, view yourself as like a failed Bitcoiner until you understand like some extremely technical concepts. You can understand those basic concepts super, super easily. There's so many resources. It used to be the case. I mean, I remember like back in like 2015, it was like, man, learning anything about Bitcoin, and certainly earlier than that, it felt like you were like pulling teeth. You had to like go and hunt stuff down, and it was really, really difficult to find good resources versus terrible ones. These days, there's so much amazing stuff being put out there. And from the financial side, I mean, the stuff you guys are doing with BM Pro, BTC Sessions has incredible stuff. I mean, River Financial, Swan has great stuff. We have great stuff. There's just so much content out there. It's easier every day to get involved.
And also, P's DMs are open. So in case you have any questions, feel free to like genuinely though, like even people who've DM'd me, I'm probably one of the worst people to DM.
Anything you want, how do I open a lighting channel? Why is there blood in my stool? My breath smells weird. Those are all questions I will 100% help you with.
Is this edible? Is the most common question that P does get.
100%.
But I think Dr. Jeff, I messed up and I didn't invite you the day that, the infamous day where P ate his shoe leather. Would you regale our audience with the story of some of your crazy antics when you...
Oh my gosh, yes. You shared some incredible... the look you just gave, you were like, he's like, motherfuckers.
You really want me to go into this? Hey, that's cool. So
I want to hear about it. Yeah.
So it all started with P, saying I'm going to eat my shoe, right? If the Ethereum merge goes through. Wasn't that the deal? And you guys were going to invite me to do live hosting, and you didn't, and I was offended. But
we fucked that up.
It's
entirely Chris's fault, by the way.
Okay, Chris. Yeah, you better own that. But that's awesome, and I respect you for saying you were going to do it and then actually doing it, because people these days say stuff like that all the time and nobody ever does it, but you did it. So mad respect for you, right there. When I was in college, I'm old, right? I'm 48. When I was in college, I'm a Gen Xer. We were just crazy. Everybody hated kids back then. We were all troublemakers. We were all like in gangs and hurting, TPing people's houses and doing crazy stuff. And one of the things we used to do back in college age was we play a game called Puke Poker. And so we didn't have any money, so we didn't play poker for money. So we played for, instead of the winner getting money, it was the loser had to eat terrible things. So before we started the game, we would go around and like go to stores and find things, or just dig through refrigerators or in garages or sheds and look for things that you could eat and probably not die or get too sick if you ate. That was the goal. It had to be as like terrible as possible or gross. And then so what we would do is we would rank them. We'd like, okay, this is like kind of the least gross. And then we'd go to like, this is terrible and nobody should ever have to eat this. So I would really hate to lose this game of Puke Poker and have to eat that. And so the way you do that is, so say, you play a game and we played 5-card or something, and it was before Texas Hold'em got popular, but so we'd play some poker. The loser would have to eat like level 1, and like maybe level 1 was you have this huge cup of mayonnaise. You had to drink like a cup of straight mayonnaise or something. And that's pretty gross, but not terrible, and then you'd sort of move on to like turkey gizzards and turkey necks and things like that. And anyways, and then you would keep going through, and the way you win the game is it's usually the guy who lost the most had to eat the most gross things. And once that person finally puked, that was, you win Puke Poker. And so the one that I won, I was not playing well that night, and so I was losing hands. And I got two of these dog treats. If you guys know, they're called sausages, and they look like little mini hot dogs. And I was doing pretty good. I'm like, I can do this. Like, I can eat this. And I was chewing it, and it just turned into this like pasty mush in your mouth when you eat it. And then it also has like chunks of bone in it.
Oh
and
my God, this is so gross.
Trying to get through this pasty stuff that I was trying to not think about what it's made of actually. And then all of a sudden I crunched into a bone, and I just went and puked all over, and everybody cheered, and so I won. So anyways, that's a great game to play if you guys don't have money. If you're a poor college kid, consider Puke Poker instead of playing for money.
I'd like to also say, Dr. Jeff, at least there was a legitimate reason as to why you had to eat dog grade food, whereas P, my co-host, decided instead of turning around and getting the can of human grade chili that is actually cheaper than the dog food that you actually ate live on air. I will never understand how or why you willingly
Look,
did that.
I'll do
There wasn't even a
anything.
bet for that one, man.
I'll do almost anything once. Hey, you know what?
That's
A
how
name
I
for
was,
sets.
B. I can respect that because I was like that too, especially if it was like with a group of people and it was for a good laugh. Like I would kind of do
Exactly.
anything.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, I also, to help to support you too, P, and against Q, like I also thought I watched this show on, and I think I told you guys about this earlier. It was on That's Incredible. It was this old TV show back last century about people that just did incredible things. That's incredible. And this one dude would just eat anything. And so one of the things he ate, like he ate a bike. He cut a bike into a ton of little pieces and then he just ate it little like piece by piece. He was working on, at the time of that episode, this is probably like early 1990s. He was eating an airplane, a small airplane. They were cutting it into tiny pieces, and every several times a day he would eat the metal and he'd eat the rubber and he'd eat the whatever parts of it. And I'm like, if this dude can eat an airplane, I can eat. The least I can do is eat a shirt, right? I mean, that's just sound logic right there.
It checks
out. So in college, I took a shirt that I had, a T-shirt that I didn't wear very often, and I started cutting it into little squares. And one by one, I would just eat little squares of my shirt.
I like imagining you doing this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got through like a fourth of it over about a 5-day period. And then I had like the worst stomach pains I've ever had. And so I wonder if it like created this blockage in my intestine somewhere or something. And so I actually quit. So I only ate a fourth of a shirt.
You're a quitter. I get it.
Yeah, I'm a quitter. I was a quitter. I'm kind of embarrassed about that story.
That's incredible. I also like imagining you doing that. Like no crowd of people. You're just like in your home. You're not even telling anyone. You're just like, you know what? I can do this. I'm gonna prove it to myself.
Yes, I can
do
it.
What it's all about.
And I'll do one last thing since we're talking about it, because we just had friends over and I was reliving this story just this last weekend. The old movie, you guys are way too young. It's called The Outsiders. It was
oh yeah, of course.
Movie. Oh, you guys know it?
Yeah.
You remember the scene where the
dude play that?
Do you remember when the
Outsiders, right?
He was smoking and then he like put the cigarette into his mouth and then he ate it.
Oh,
and I said, that is so stinking. That is so tough and so cool. I'm gonna do that someday. That was what I said. So we're in college, okay, and I'm with my friends, and back then I used to smoke cigars with my college friends, and I had a pipe. I used to smoke a pipe, like old school pipe, not the modern pipes. Anyways, by the way, people do not smoke. I don't recommend it. It's unhealthy for you. As a doctor, I have to tell people. Okay, but anyway, so what I did is I smoked this cigar down as far down as I could till it was like burning my fingers because it was so hot. Put it out on my shoe, waited till it cooled off a little bit, and then I popped it in my mouth and ate it. And I'm going to tell you guys, if you've never had tobacco poisoning, I thought I was going to die. I was standing and for like the next 2 hours, I was having this massive vertigo, and we were actually out camping that night. And long story short, I like had to crawl back to my tent because the world was moving and shifting so much. And I crawled into my sleeping bag. I was just pouring sweat. And my friends thought I was going to die, but they just left me because, like, well, if he's going to die, he's going to die. Let's just let him go.
Yeah, they're like, he brought this on himself.
And I woke
Play
up.
Stupid games, win stupid prizes.
Exactly. I woke up the next day and I was fine. And so, but anyways, so I would not recommend eating a cigar or cigarette.
This is incredible.
Or
this
smoking one, for that matter.
Yeah, don't smoke either. It's bad for you. Bad for you.
I feel like this is more alpha than we've gotten in a long time.
That was the most useful part of this conversation. I think people learn the most about it.
Yes. And I literally have about 500 really stupid stories like that about what I used to do when I was high school and college age. So
I look forward to hearing so many of them this week when we get to hang out in person.
Yes, Absolutely. It's going to be awesome. Are you guys both going to be in LA this week?
We will. We will.
We're going to
be filming hometown.
That's right. That's right. Get ready.
Great.
Welcome to my hood. But Dr. Jeff, before we say our goodbyes and let you go off, I know you do have a meeting, but I want to hand it off to you to let people know like what it is you are working on with Bitcoin Magazine and what they should be keeping an eye out.
I'm having a lot of fun right now. So I haven't even started doing what I was technically hired for, but so far what I've been doing is spending a lot of time talking to Dylan LeClaire and Sam Rule, and Spencer also is a master. So the four of us get together and talk every morning. about what these guys are going to be writing about, kind of talk macro together, talk about Bitcoin. These guys do just, I think, some of the finest work in the space as far as doing deep dives into Bitcoin, into it from an investment standpoint, into it from like an on-chain point, derivatives point of view. They go into, they were talking about Bitcoin miners being in trouble before Core Scientific announced and before Argo Blockchain announced their terrible results, and fell literally 75% in one day. Core Scientific did, which I pointed out on Twitter too. The big shops, the huge chains that do their analysis, after Core Scientific fell 75%, and actually they fell 78% in one day. After that, they moved it from a buy to a hold. They said, okay, maybe you shouldn't own this. And so I'm saying the work that Dylan and Sam are doing literally front ran what went on, and they're doing great work. These guys are super smart. I'm kind of like, I don't know what you even call me. I'm the sort of the team manager. One other thing I'm going to be doing at some point is running a fund for Bitcoin. It'll be a not-for-profit kind of fund where I'm going to teach people how to trade Bitcoin and Bitcoin, not Bitcoin itself, but Bitcoin related kind of things. So Bitcoin equities. We're talking about block before. We're talking about Bitcoin miners. Like, what if you buy those things and go long or go short in a bear market and preserve your purchasing power? You know, what kind of strategies do I use as a fund manager and as an RIA for my own clients? How could I do that? And we're going to put that in the newsletter itself and put out actionable investment ideas and trade ideas and things like that. So something to be looking for. Hopefully that will come out in the next month or two. And that will be a nice addition to the awesome work that Dylan and Sam are already doing at Bitcoin Magazine Pro.
Fantastic.
And of course, we do have at 4 p.m. Eastern time this afternoon, we are doing our Bitcoin Magazine Pro Spaces. This will be the only spaces, I believe, this week, just because of Pacific Bitcoin. So Joe Consorti is going to be joining us this afternoon. Be sure to check that out over on Twitter Spaces. If you are not following Dr. Jeff Ross on Twitter, you quite frankly are just doing the bear market wrong. You're doing yourself an injustice. Dr. Jeff, in advance of what you will see on Twitter that Greg Zaj made on your behalf. If you like it, it was our idea. If you didn't, it was all his fault.
Come after Greg if I don't like it.
Exactly.
Greg's always pushing the envelope. I like it. I respect you, Greg. Thanks for that, man.
Alrighty, guys. We are going to wrap up today's show now. But before we do, I want to also remind everyone and let everyone know, as Dr. Jeff mentioned, tomorrow is election day. I know Bitcoiners don't really give two shits about elections, but of course we do, because there are some very important Bitcoin politicians that are running for various offices. And we are going to have an election special. We're going to have our normal show tomorrow afternoon, so don't you fret about that. We will be back here tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern time to kick things off. But tomorrow night at, Chris, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Eastern time? Tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern time, we are going to start an election special with Nolan Bowerly, PPP, and QQQ. The three of us are going to be bringing you live election coverage as election results start getting rolled in. You are going to see in real time how much we care or don't care about certain things that happen. And of course, you will have none other than fan favorite Nolan Bowerly walking us through which elections actually help impact Bitcoiners and push Bitcoin further, or may actually be a hurdle that Bitcoiners are going to have to deal with. Make sure you like and subscribe down below, guys. We will be back tomorrow. And of course, we will see you all on Twitter Spaces in a couple of hours.